People's Assembly holds its first session in this ordinary course, and Al-Laham asserts that protecting the security of the homeland remains a priority. Units of the Syrian army storm the hideouts of mercenary terrorists and kill a number of their leaders. The Saudi and Bahraini regimes continue to suppress popular protests that call for political reforms and the release of detainees. Good afternoon, welcome to our news bulletin. I'm Dania Nizam. The People's Assembly held its first session in the third ordinary course with the participation of all members of the government. The government made a presentation of the economic and service situation as well as steps for national dialogue. The Speaker of the Assembly, Mohammed Jihad Al-Laham, asserted that the terrorism targeting Syria is supported from the outside in order to destroy the country, its infrastructure and oil products. The enemy infiltrated Syria at the instigation of foreign forces. This calls for fast work to block the way of such infiltration that targets our security. We are facing a big challenge to preserve Syria's unity and the dignity of human victims slaughtered in the name of religion. The Speaker added that national dialogue remained the basic role of the political program to solve the crisis in Syria through contact with all citizens to block the terrorism targeting all our people. The Prime Minister, Dr. Al-Laham, asserted that the government continues to carry out its programs and that this stage requires everyone to hold the honour of national responsibility. Despite the difficulties, the government continues its efforts to restore stability and safety to the whole of the country, whose security remains one of the first priorities that deserves every effort. The Prime Minister said the electricity sector was targeted by the armed terrorists. This reduced the supply of energy by more than 50%. Mr. Al-Laham asserted that the economic siege was imposed by the EU and the US, as well as some Arabs against Syria. This reduced the performance of the sector of healthcare because the terrorists attacked hospitals, dispensaries and health centres. He pointed out that the terrorists systematically targeted the development and service sectors in order to create a crisis and to show the government a failure. The Turkish government continues to violate international law through organising and supporting terrorist crimes in Syria and plundering the wealth of the Syrian people and economic infrastructure. The Syrian Foreign Ministry addressed two identical letters to the chairman of the UN Security Council and the UN Secretary General. Mr. Faris Shabi, chairman of the Aleppo Chamber of Commerce, called for registering and documenting Turkish aggressive acts against Syria. This call is based on international law ruling cases of conflict that followed the Second World War, starting with the Korean War and the Indo-Pakistani War, in addition to the disintegration of Yugoslavia. Mr. Shabi called for raising complaints against the Turkish thief who sits on the chair of the Prime Minister in Turkey. The attacks of Turkey constitute a flagrant violation of the resolution of the UN General Assembly number 2625 of 1970. This resolution considers any intervention in the internal affairs of sovereign countries, creating cases of threat against world peace and security. The religious ideology of the thief, Erdogan, and his ilk lead to worse crimes like the crimes of Al-Qaeda, violating the UN Charter and the rules of the International Court of Justice. The UN Charter prohibits the organization or the financing of terrorists and destructive activities or military moves aimed against another country through violent acts. Such acts violate the ruling of the International Court of Justice in the case of Nicaragua in 1986. The court found the instigation and support of armed gangs in another country an intervention in its internal affairs. This is what Turkey is doing through its support of the armed opposition in Syria. The Turkish government continues to violate the UN Security Council Resolution 1373 of 2001, which called upon states to take the necessary measures before accepting requests of refuge in order to ensure that the refugees would not commit acts of terrorism. Patriarch Yohanna X Yazigi led a mass in the Cathedral of St. Nicholas in Beirut. He called for the construction of bridges of love in the Oriental countries and to pray for the restoration of stability, especially in Syria, the cradle of civilization. He prayed to God to lead Syria to peace and to a decent life. Continuing their efforts to prepare the suitable atmosphere to hold the Conference of Comprehensive National Dialogue, the subsidiary committee is assigned to set up the necessary mechanisms to call upon the national opposition and various political powers continue to hold meetings in various parts of the country. The subsidiary committee in Al-Raqqa held a consultative meeting with social civil activities and representatives of parties and popular and professional organizations. They discussed the form and content of this conference in order to implement the political program to solve the crisis. The participants asserted that such meetings were necessary to discuss ways and means of overcoming the crisis and exchanging ideas and proposals concerning common visions to launch this process. In Homs, the subsidiary committee held its first consultative session with political, social, religious and cultural parties and activities in order to exchange ideas and proposals to agree on common visions for the purpose of launching the process of national dialogue. In related news, in Tartus Governorate, consultative meetings continue for the third day with the political and economic community events to reach a national charter agreed on by all parties and sides in order to overcome the current crisis in the country. In Sweden, the National Dialogue Subcommittee held meetings with the two parties of the Democratic Socialist Unionist and Syria's the homeland as part of preparations to hold a comprehensive dialogue. Participants asserted that the national dialogue is not restricted to be held between the government and the opposition. It should be held among all political and social parties in Syria. They emphasized that the dialogue is a priority to solve the crisis in the country. In Aleppo, the subsidiary committee of salvation headed by the governor Mohammed Wahid al-Aqad discussed the salvation activities in the governorate and the services offered by the government in collaboration with the Syrian Red Crescent. These services are provided to the people forced out of their homes by terrorists. The committee called for supplying basic materials and health care to these people as soon as possible. In the Idleb countryside, units of our armed forces stormed a number of terrorist groups in their hideouts, including weapon stores in Kufr Haya, killing and wounding many of them. Among the dead were Nidal Baqur and Omar Baqur. In the countryside of Jisr al-Shughur, our armed forces destroyed terrorist hideouts in Ain al-Suda and Al-Shaghir. In Saudi Arabia, protests are still calling for the release of the detainees and for political and social reforms. In related news, a woman and her child were injured by gunfire near a prison in the town of Al-Awamiyah in Al-Qutayf, east of the country. Protests persisted in the eastern region of Saudi Arabia since last March, calling for political and social reforms, but Saudi authorities continue to use force to repel these protests, killing a number of protesters and injuring several others. In Bahrain, police used tear gas and sand bombs to disperse protesters walking in the funeral of Hussein al-Yazigi, who was killed by security forces last Thursday. Police blocked some roads leading to Al-Dia village west of Al-Manama to prevent thousands of people from joining the marches, which were held to mark the second anniversary of the protests calling for democracy and real reforms. The opposition of the 14th of February coalition criticized the measures taken by the authorities, calling for an end to the ruling party's absolute seizure of power and to stop the policy of exclusion, oppression and marginalization of other parties. This is it for our news for today. For more information, you can visit our website, syriaonline.sy. After the break, Vani Konajian brings us Syria's latest economy. God bless you and God bless our beloved country.